So many of our kids are now shut-ins, devoid of personal interaction. We gotta get out of our bubbles. We gotta mingle. It's time to mingle.
I know what's wrong with America. We're living in an age of conflict brought about by disconnect, which has frayed the fabric of our nation. It has polarized our politics. It has harmed the mental health of our kids. But I think I know how to fix it. At long last, welcome to the Mingle Project. Go forth and mingle. Thank you. Hey gang, welcome to episode 3. Wow, 3 already of the Mingle Project on YouTube. Please be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Tell a friend what we're up to here. Let them know that the Mingle Project is shorthand for my attempt to address the twin concerns of political polarization and societal disconnect. In episode 1, we set the stage, explaining our need to restore common experience. If I had to reduce to a soundbite what we most need as a country, that's it, common experience. Or to borrow Bill Maher's word, to mingle. And then in episode 2, we addressed the most primal consequence of our lack of mingling. We talked about sex, or sex being in decline. And you can still watch my full briefing, The Mingle Movie, here on my YouTube channel, that 1-hour presentation that I made in 2024 to a sold-out theater in Asheville, North Carolina. Okay, on to episode 3 now with a very special guest. The media has played a huge role in the fracturing of our society, and talk radio led the way. Over 30 plus years, I've had a front row seat. After having unique political experiences as a young Republican, I was invited to provide commentary on radio and television. And I've never left the airwaves since. Things were different when I entered the talk radio world 3 decades ago in Philadelphia as a guest, then a guest host, and then finally as the host of my own program. Yeah, check that out, right? That's my first publicity picture back at 96.5 FM WWDB, the talk station. That's where I cut my teeth. And WWDB was typical of big market talk radio in America back then. In our primetime lineup, we had a conservative, we had a liberal, we had a libertarian, and they all talked politics. But we had a real estate show, we had a travel show, we had a food show, we even had a weekly sex show. The hosts were a collection of local characters, especially the host of the sex show, Dr. James A. Corey. He hosted a program on physical therapy, except for that one night a week when he became the love doctor. What a great guy. Getting started, I often guest hosted for our evening host, Bernie Herman. He billed himself as the gentleman of broadcasting. Today, you can't get hired if that were your brand. Back then, our job was to sustain conversation, tell stories, offer expertise if you had any, and entertain the callers. There were no ideological litmus tests. Your political party didn't even matter. We were evaluated based on our ability to make the telephone lines ring. And that's the environment in which I got my start. So, when and why did it all change, and with what consequences? Brian Rosenwald knows the answer. He earned a PhD studying talk radio and then wrote the definitive book on the subject, Talk Radio's America. Brian joins me now. Dr. Rosenwald, nice to have you here.
It's always good to be with you, Michael.
So, why was 1988 such a watershed year?
In a name, really, it's Rush Limbaugh. Rush Limbaugh changes absolutely everything. And the thing to understand is he never set out to change the world. This was a guy who loved radio. He was a middle school kid, used to go on the station. His dad had a part ownership in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and just loved broadcasting. And he kept getting fired in the 70s as a DJ. He used names like Jeff Christie. It wasn't Rush Limbaugh then. It was Rusty Sharp and Jeff Christie. And years later, when he took off, people who fired him, they said, you know, remember that Jeff Christie guy you fired? That was him. And they were like, what do you mean that was him? Like, I remember, because he was the kind of guy who would call a pizza place, and there were 500 pizzas, and say, hey, I'm from the competing station down the street, and order them, and they'd get the pizzas and say, we didn't order these. That was the kind of thing he was while he was playing Elton John records in the 70s. And he kept getting fired because he wouldn't listen. And then he finally goes and does group sales and marketing for the Kansas City Royals in the 80s. He quits because he's miserable. And he goes one more radio chance in Kansas City, and he gets fired again because he's too edgy for the Mormon church who owns his station. But he got lucky. A guy who was consulting on the station, his partner's out in Sacramento, and he goes out to Sacramento, and they finally let him be who he is. And he does this hijinks-filled, fun-filled show, and in 1988, it goes national. And he takes off, and he's still doing, gags and nicknames, and he's got themed updates. He'll do like a wilderness update. You hear birds squawking, and you hear mortar blasts and shotgun shells and things.
A lot of humor.
A lot of humor. It's fun. It's funny. No one's ever heard anything like it. And he starts taking off. And initially people call the program directors of the station and say, "What do you have this guy on? He's so coarse and unrefined and all this." And then a couple of weeks they're saying, "Keep him on forever. He's the best." And what ends up changing everything is that people start calling him Michael, and they say, "Thank God you're on the air, Rush. We finally have a voice." And what it came down to is he applied the hijinks of that 70s DJ to the politics he heard growing up in his rock-ribbed Republican family. Around the dinner table. I think it was either his father or his grandfather showed Nixon around Cape Girardeau in 1952 when he came on a campaign trip on the ticket with Eisenhower. And that was the politics that Limbaugh grew up with. And that was what people heard. And he made politics fun and pulled people in. And there was this whole segment of America that felt voiceless. They felt like the media, they'd never heard their opinions. They didn't
Conservatives
hear the story.
in particular.
Conservatives in particular. Laura Ingraham, the Fox News host, often tells the story about how when Walter Cronkite would say, "And that's the way it is," her father would growl back at the TV, "No, it's not, Walt." That kind of person was hungering for this. Nobody knew it was there. Nobody knew it was there. And then Limbaugh starts to hear these callers, and he's a smart enough businessman to say, "Okay, that's what these people want." And especially as he gets older, the hijinks starts to fade away because that scared advertisers. We're talking about the era of Opie and Anthony with the sex thing in the church kind of thing, and Howard Stern. And advertisers don't want that kind of edgy stuff. So Limbaugh kind of backs away from some of this stuff that might get himself in trouble and becomes more of a traditional political commentator in a lot of ways. Albeit still, doing voices. When Trump comes down the escalator the first time, he's doing a terrible Trump impersonation. So he still has fun, but it's him.
To put this into my time frame, just when I'm getting in, I'm being invited onto WWDB as a guest and then a guest host. Rush is syndicated from Sacramento, and now it's like that wave comes across the country and everything changes, and it's no longer have the local Irv Homer, right? Have the local Frank Ford, even though he's a liberal, a progressive, married to the Philadelphia DA at the time. Instead, Limbaugh becomes the model.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about WWDB is they didn't really want Limbaugh.
Right.
When we
were the last big market station in the country to take him, and it's because Chuck Schwartz thought somebody else would and put him out of business.
That's exactly right.
Chuck and Susan Schwartz owned the station.
Yep, they were worried that they were going to put out of business, and because the belief when Limbaugh goes national, Michael, is that talk radio to be good has to be local. That you have these characters in every city,
right.
New York, in LA, it was Michael Jackson, not the singer, but this
Yep.
guy who's a South African guy who interviewed everybody from mobsters to heads of state.
New York, it was Bob Grant.
It was Bob Grant screaming, "Get off my phone." And he was a conservative,
Yep.
but he was on stations with liberals.
Right.
And Limbaugh changes the whole paradigm. People start to say, okay, we can do this nationally. We can syndicate shows in, and they say, hey, this conservatism thing is working for him. And so they start to try other conservative shows. And the big turning point comes in about 93, 94. There are two stations, one in Seattle and one in San Francisco. And the one in Seattle, ironically enough, gets changed in a moment when there's the local station manager and stuff are smoking cigars with Limbaugh's affiliate manager. They took some of his cigars, and they're smoking cigars. And the Limbaugh's affiliate manager says to him, "Why do you have that liberal on at night?" It might have been Alan Combs or somebody like that. Nobody wants to hear that. And so these guys were on the station say, "Okay, let's experiment. Let's try going all conservative." And they go from like 23rd to 1st in the market. Because niche broadcasting works in these liberal markets. These conservatives feel like we don't have a neighborhood bar where we can congregate. And talk radio stations become that. And the same thing
became the clubhouse.
Yeah, it became the clubhouse. Same thing happened in San Francisco, another liberal market. And then as you get the industry consolidating, they say, well, okay, this is the format that's working. We just bought 500 stations. What are we going to do with them? Well, we're going to put this all conservative talk thing on. And what you ended up having is even local conservatives who were successful. This guys, John and Ken out in LA. They'd been in Atlantic City and Trenton, and they were #1 in afternoon drive for like 30 years. They tried to go syndicated in the late 90s, and it flopped because they weren't conservative enough. They were kind of libertarian-y, kind of populist-y, and it wasn't good enough because everybody wanted someone who sounded like Rush. And that was the audience.
Let's also remind everybody that in the precise time period that we're talking about, the rollout of Rush Limbaugh, there's no cable television yet. It's on the horizon. And of course, there's no internet because Al Gore has yet to invent it. You can decide if that's a laugh line or, okay, anyway. So when now Fox News, and we're really condensing the whole book into a couple of minute conversation, but CNN is on air, and then comes Fox News, and Fox News takes a page out of Rush's playbook, and that's really how Fox gets launched.
Yeah, now, so the only two people who would know the truth of this were Roger Ailes and Rush Limbaugh, and I couldn't get either of them to talk to me before they were passed away, but Limbaugh had done a TV show for 4 years, from 92 to 96.
People forget that.
People forget that. It was a late night syndicated TV show.
The ties, the shirts, yep.
The loud ties, the shirts. He got scolded by
Yep.
his mother one night because he said he had a picture of the new White House dog and showed a picture of child Chelsea Clinton. His own mother said, no, you don't go there. But he did TV, and his producer was Roger Ailes, who was a good enough friend of Limbaugh's that he had arranged Limbaugh's overnight in the Lincoln bedroom in the White House under George Herbert Walker Bush in 91 or 92. And so we don't know for sure. You know, Ailes had been pitching conservative TV back to Richard Nixon in the early 70s. He had this vision. But we don't know. But I suspect that Limbaugh's success got him to say, okay, the moment is right now. And they launched Fox in 1996, and it becomes the television version. And here's the thing that people don't know, Michael. Early on, I discovered some tapes where Limbaugh's doing what people in the media business, you know this, the audience may not, but it's called direct read ad. It's the most expensive ad that you can get.
Sure.
And Limbaugh is doing an ad, and he says, you know, that the tagline is Fox News is fair news, yeah. And he's saying, you know, call your cable company and tell them you got to give this new channel a chance. If you want news that's not biased by the opinions of the commentators and the reporters, Fox News is your answer. And they knew that their audience was Limbaugh's audience. And these people become kind of enmeshed in an echo chamber because all of a sudden Limbaugh's audience goes from watching the nightly news and listening to him, so they're getting multiple perspectives and maybe reading a newspaper, to we're watching Fox, we're listening to Rush. And what happens over time is, you know, in the early days, Rush would read stories to his audience from the Wall Street Journal, from the New York Times, you know, maybe National Review. Over time, that would become Breitbart and other, you know, conservative outlets that were more outlandish. And people are getting trapped in this echo chamber. They're not hearing anything from outside of it. And that was the big change that Fox kind of ushers in.
Right. And obviously what we're discussing is the rise of the polarized media, which begins by your telling, and I agree with it, I lived through it, had a front row seat, in 1988. There's something else, though, that the audience needs to appreciate, and that is when Rush is syndicated in the late 80s, we are ending the Reagan 80s, which people might remember as a very conservative era, when in fact, during the 1980s, 60% of the House and Senate were comprised of moderates.
That's right.
And through those years, the National Journal used to take the annual ideological pulse of the House and Senate, and that's where I get the data to make that statement. And as Rush rises and the media becomes more polar, something happens to Washington.
So there's two elements of this. The first is the thing that people forget the most about these commentators, which is that they care not about red or blue. I'm borrowing this line from a programmer at iHeartMedia, but if it's not red or blue, it's green, which is to say this is all about the bottom line.
Absolutely.
Well, the thing is a sober, serious conversation where you say, you know, those guys on the left, they're nice enough guys. I don't agree with them. They have a different vision, but they want what's best for America. That's not very entertaining. Where you talk about the devil, Bill Clinton, or something like that. You know, these people are trying to destroy America. They hate you. They hate your values. Like that, anything that provokes emotion is good content. And so these guys were driven to be more and more extreme and say, you know, make their policy points in the most extreme way possible. And this is happening against a backdrop of geographic polarization, which is to say that, more and more places were not competitive in general elections. They were, what mattered were primaries.
Right.
And that is really important because who votes in a primary? It's 10 or 12% of the electorate. It's the most hardcore people.
And who do they listen to?
The conservative talk show host.
Right. But let's also say that when Fox has its success, MSNBC, struggling for a voice, decides they're going to go in the opposite direction, and it worked well for them too, because it's not just the right, the polarized media. I'm talking about the left and the right. It may have begun on the right, but I think it's all over now.
It is, and part of the key is polarized media takes off when you have a side feeling voiceless. During the George W. Bush years, that's the left.
Right.
And they tried a couple of liberal talk radio hosts that we could spend an hour explaining why that didn't work. But it ends up being MSNBC and Keith Olbermann and Chris Matthews and people like that who bear the commercial benefits of that. And so their people on the left are starting to get trapped in that echo chamber.
I'm really speeding through the book, but by 2016, now the stage has been set for what?
It's been set for Donald Trump, who in a lot of ways is just a talk radio host.
Right.
The nicknames, even the video yesterday, the horrible racist kind of AI generated video of Hakeem Jeffries with a sombrero on and a mustache and Chuck Schumer, it was bad. But that's the kind of hijinks that you see in conservative media. The stuff that somebody on the left is going to say, oh my God, that's racist and terrible. And somebody on the right, even if they think it's bad, might be chuckling and saying, oh, this Trump guy, he's fun. The media about all the reporters and things like that, the nicknames that Trump would give them, and his antics and everything being a show.
In other words, voters, especially Republican primary voters, have now been conditioned to vote for their favorite talk radio host, and that was Donald Trump. You're offering a thesis here as to how Trump got elected.
Yep. Yeah, there's two pieces of that. There is first of all, these guys have spent 20 years ripping Republicans like George Herbert Walker Bush, good, decent individuals who wanted to have deals. It always struck me, there's a line in, I think it's John Meacham's biography of George Herbert Walker Bush, where he invites Newt Gingrich, who to Rush Limbaugh listeners was Mr. Newt, because they were close, and Vin Weber, who was his right-hand man, who people forget more, but is now a lobbyist and was from Minnesota. And, they're having this conversation, and Bush asked them, what's the thing that kind of scares you the most about me? And they say, well, Mr. President, it's that you're going to do what's right for the country, and that's not necessarily what's right for House Republicans. And that's what we're doing. And what happens is the guy who's focused on what's right for the country, not what's good for Republicans, not what conservative base voters want, they brand them rhinos, Republicans in name only. They say, these guys, they're impure. If they would just fight for you, you would get what you wanted. We never get what we wanted because they always cave to the Democrats. And so they condition them to want a fighter, first of all. And Donald Trump is nothing but a fighter.
Pugilist, absolutely.
He's always punching back. And the second thing is they conditioned them to see things in this entertainment world where it's all a reality TV show. And what's Donald Trump? Where's his background? It's reality TV, it's pro wrestling, it's a show.
Donald Trump could make the telephone lines ring. Yep. Okay, so now you've heard the thesis, right? You've heard the thesis from Dr. Brian Rosenwald. By the way, earned a PhD studying talk radio. Is there anybody else who has done that, as far as you know?
There's one other person who writes about earlier talk radio, like the
but
50s
not this
and
talk
60s.
radio.
Not this talk radio.
Oh, okay. So he's laid out the timeline. You've heard the thesis. It really, if you want to pinpoint when a polarized media begins, it's 1988 with the syndication of Rush Limbaugh. By all accounts, certainly ours, a masterful entertainer. A masterful entertainer. But this really is the origin of the fragmentation of the media marketplace. I wonder what Rush Limbaugh thinks of this theory. After all, he's not here to explain himself, or is he? We'll come back in just a moment and you will hear what Rush thinks or thought of Brian Rosenwald's theory right after this.
This is Parks.
This is how you roll, this is how it goes. This is how you pop, this is how you rock. Take a chance, do a dance, little romance. This is how you. This is how you win. This is how you quick sight. This is how you all night. 360 hit me. Now we're going all in. I can feel it calling. The crowd, the light, the night, the sights, the vibe is right. This is how you. This is
Parks, Pennsylvania's #1 casino experience. This is how you win.
Let me take you out of your media bubble. I'm Michael Smerconish. I have a radio program on SiriusXM. I have a television program on CNN. My passion project, that's my daily newsletter. 20 aggregated links that I hand select each and every day in combination with the unique work of award-winning editorial cartoonists. That's what you get every day for free by 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Those aggregated news links, they're essentially my show prep. I'm giving you the benefit of all of the work that I do for every day's radio program and every weekend's television program. People think I speak for a living. Nah, I read for a living. I need to know what I'm going to say. Take advantage of all of this work for free. Ad Fontes says, ideologically speaking, I'm dead center. I wear that as a badge of honor. Subscribe to the Smerconish.com free daily newsletter. Okay, welcome back to episode 3 of the Mingle Project. We are talking about talk, and my special guest is Dr. Brian Rosenwald. Also looking at some of your live reaction, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Watch all of the Mingle Project episodes. Turn on a friend. David Kesson, aren't we more informed from hearing opposing views? Doesn't that make us think? Absolutely. Yeah, and what do you always hear me say? You've got to change the channel. Mix up your media diet. The sole reason that I created the daily newsletter is so that I could put my time where my mouth is and offer people a balanced media diet, which is 20 aggregated links that I painstakingly hand select from disparate sources and generate them every morning in the form of a newsletter. Alexander Buck, can Michael explain why he doesn't think bringing back the fairness doctrine would work? What a great, I'm gonna lean on Brian for this as well. I don't like the fairness doctrine. When I came of age, it was already over. It happened on Ronald Reagan's watch, but the radio station still treated it as if it existed, so that if I wanted to bring on a member of Congress and it were an election year or a congressional candidate, they would tell me, they would force me to invite the other side. Now, by the way, that's the way I roll. I just don't like the government. Can I bring in Brian on this unexpectedly? Fairness doctrine, what thoughts do you have?
There are things that people don't understand about the fairness doctrine and FCC regulation, which is, first of all, they only apply to broadcast stations, network or radio and television. So it wouldn't apply to cable or the internet at all. And the Supreme Court would never allow it to apply to the internet or to cable because it was all about scarcity, right? When the Fairness Doctrine is enacted, there are very few stations, and they say you have a responsibility to give people a well-rounded picture
that was
of
the
things.
premise, because otherwise people won't be able to hear that voice.
Right. And while when you're interviewing candidates, you had to do equal time.
Yep.
What it actually only required was overall balance when discussing controversial issues, which meant for most stations, Rush did his show in Sacramento for 3 years under the Fairness Doctrine.
Great point.
But there was a liberal on in the afternoon. That's all it meant. And when he went to New York to get syndicated, there was a Brooklyn liberal named Lynn Samuels on, and the guy who put Rush on in New York said, I thought she would be have been just as big as him, but she had a thick Brooklyn accent, and that limited her ceiling. But the Fairness Doctrine would not affect most of our media today, and in so much as it would, it can be weaponized, as we've just seen, vividly over the last couple weeks, where you get the wrong FCC chair, and now people's licenses are getting threatened.
Great point.
So it doesn't really help anything.
All right. So I want to get to this. What did Rush Limbaugh make of the theories, the thesis put forward by my guest, Dr. Brian Rosenwald? Well, we know the answer to that question because in 2019, when the book came out, Brian was my guest on CNN, and we had a very similar conversation to that which we're having now. Rush Limbaugh, in August of 2019, discussed Brian's book and our interview. I have 3 cuts that I want you to hear, and I'll give Brian the chance to respond as well. Here's cut number 1 of Rush.
There's a guy that's written a book on talk radio. There have been a lot of people who have written books on talk radio, and none of them get it. And I've even talked to a couple of them. It amazes me. This guy's focus on talk radio happens to be me and this program. I did not talk to this guy. I don't know who he is. before I ran into these sound bites. But it is interesting to me, nevertheless, that all of the books about talk radio, how many of them totally miss either the history of the modern era, which began with this show in August of 1988, and then what has happened since then. But this guy kind of gets it. His name is Brian Rosenwald. He was on CNN Saturday. So nobody saw this, which is why I want to share the sound bites with you. Michael Smerconish was talking to him about his new book, Talk Radio's America. And Smerconish says, you say it wasn't the escalator ride that began the Trump candidacy. It was actually August 1st, 1988 that began the Trump candidacy. How come?
That's the day that Rush Limbaugh takes his act national. And it's a great show, and people tune in. And they start forming this habit of listening to talk radio and then later cable news. And what they hear every day is calls for a fighter. You know, it doesn't make for good radio to say, hey, nuance, compromise. That stuff's boring. But fighting, that's good radio. And
hey, when he said, I mean, we were dying. I don't know if our microphones were hot or not, but when Rush says Smerconish had him on CNN, so nobody saw it, I'm dying.
Yeah.
But again,
that's Rush.
That's Rush. He was. I mean, he had that ability.
In his early days, he used to go and do something called the Rush to Excellence Tour, and he'd strap on a tuxedo and go out and do a stand-up comedy act, you know, for small towns with his affiliate stations. He did one in Hickory, North Carolina, where he had to announce that because of snow, like the pinto bean dinner was canceled the next day. But he'd do things like he'd strap a condom over a microphone and say, "It's safe talk now. This will protect you from all the evil words I enunciate." That was Rush.
Right.
He was a showman.
Totally.
And even as a commentator,
I remember him coming to Philadelphia to the Academy of Music, home of the Philadelphia Orchestra, until they built the Kimmel Center. So 2,000 people. And Brian, what I remember is that he walked out that night. Actually, I remember that I met him backstage and had my father, because my father was a big Rush fan. And whenever he would drop my name in his program, oftentimes in the context of talking about you, he would always say, you know, I met Smerconish's father. He brought him backstage and, you know, blah, blah. But anyway, the point is, at the Academy of Music, he stood up without any notes, and for 90 minutes, he had that crowd mesmerized. Let me go to the second clip. Again, this is Rush Limbaugh, August of 2019, talking about my guest, Brian Rosenwald.
So this guy is claiming that this program is what effectively set the stage, laid the groundwork for Trump to come in. Now, many people think that talk radio is combative and is filled with attack this and attack this. I have pointed out, I don't know how many times, this program is actually nuanced. There is more policy nuance on this program than you'll find on NPR or that you'll find in the New York Times. And the reason for that is that we look at both sides of everything. I do a better job of explaining what liberals believe and what their policies will mean than they do. They, of course, on their programming, totally ignore the substance of we are. We're just racists or now white supremacists or bigots. And their mission with us is to discredit us and discard us. You who listen to this program, know more about American liberalism and the American left than people that do not listen to this program. As far as this attack business going, I've always said, don't attack anybody. I'm minding my own business. I get up every day and I look at the things that I believe in, the institutions, traditions, people that I believe in, under assault every day, and I defend them. Now, some people think defending things is an attack, but I'm telling you, it isn't. If they left us alone, they weren't lying about us, mischaracterizing us, and so forth, there wouldn't be any attacks here. There would be explanations of who they are, which they do consider to be an attack. Next question. Now, lest anybody think the book is a hit job on Rush, you give Limbaugh props, being a master showman and a performing virtuoso.
He blazed a path. He created an entirely different media form from anything that ever existed before because he's a great show. You know, early in his time on the air, he would abort callers. He would play a vacuum cleaner sound effect. You'd hear screams in the background as he's hanging up on a caller. There were things nobody had ever seen or heard, and people had to tune in every day because they never knew what he was going to say. He was simply giving voice to the bedrock conservative sentiments that he had grown up with and that his audience had. It wasn't like he was some sort of puppet master who, directed his audience to believe things. His audience already believed them.
So people watching us on the Mingle Project might be confused. Wait a minute, Michael, you want to put us together. You're beefing about the fragmentation of society, including in the media. You're saying this is a major driver. It sounds like you're sitting here with Dr. Rosenwald having a couple of yucks along with Rush Limbaugh. I'm saying two things can be true at the same time. He was a master showman and entertainer. You have to give him credit for that, even if you disagree with his politics, and I disagreed with many of his politics. But this was also the start of something that I argue has not served the nation well.
Well, first of all, there's three factors here. One being, as I mentioned earlier, in his early days, he's reading for the New York Times. He's reading from the Wall Street Journal. By the time his run ended in 2021, he had was reading from Breitbart. He was reading from things that were much more conspiratorial, and instead of informing his audience, in some cases misinforming them. He also, part of being an entertainer is that you push boundaries, that you don't just make a policy point in a boring, staid kind of way. He used to love to read something incendiary from some newsletter he got or something in the morning. Sort of, he did his show prep, just like you did.
Of course.
And he would read something and the media would go nuts. They'd say, Limbaugh said this. And the next day he'd say, Mr. Snerdley, play back the tape. Play back, what I said yesterday. And he'd say, see, I didn't say it. I was just sharing this interesting thing that I saw. And what was the point of that? Was plausible deniability. It was a chance to tweak his opponents. But it portrayed something in an incendiary way. And they said, well, I don't necessarily think that. I'm just having this conversation. And that, kind of incendiary element helped polarize us. And the other thing is, a lot of the people who came after him were just a lot less talented than he was.
I mean, so many tried to imitate. Air America was a total failure, right? Nobody has filled his shoes. No one has filled his shoes. By the way, some more reaction from people who are watching us live. Alexander Buck, I think I'm going to start a mingle walk. Okay, I love it. Any form in which you're going to go out and mingle is a good thing. Jamie, have we learned anything about deep down disagreement and the thin crust of coexistence? I'm not sure I understand what that means. Do you have a reaction to that?
Well, I think the thing is, first of all, I think we actually have fewer deep down disagreements than we think we do.
Totally.
There are things where if you actually talk to each other, one thing that struck me over the last couple of weeks since Charlie Kirk was assassinated is if you listen to conservatives talk about him, and I'm talking about less political conservatives, not the DC set, they heard clips of Charlie Kirk as a faith leader, as somebody with a positive case for their faith, and they like that. You have liberals who only heard the most incendiary things he said, and the fact that he was kind of a troll. He was pushing boundaries, just like Rush Limbaugh. And by the way, Charlie Kirk got sort of into things by listening to Rush on his lunch break in school. So there's a continuity here. But it's that people are not even living in the same existence, so they don't know that, hey, we might actually agree on more than we think.
It's because they're not mingling.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one more cut. Again, Rush Limbaugh, 2019, talking about my guest when Brian's book came out. Listen.
This guy gets it. This guy gets it more than anybody that I've ever encountered writing, either about talk radio in general or about this program. Do we have time for one more? Yeah, there's one more. May as well stick with it. Next question. There's this mindset out there that the whole talk landscape was controlled by individuals eager to spread conservative wisdom. In the book, that's not the conclusion you reach.
The motivation, as Rush always said, was to charge confiscatory advertising rates, which means how can we make the most money? What's the best, most engaging show that we can put on every single day? And that didn't always work with what Republicans wanted to do. At times, Republicans would say, hey, this is the best deal we can cut. And talk radio would say, no, stand up and fight for us, fight for our values. They're rolling over again. For the mainstream media, for Democrats, that's all they do. They just roll over. And that's the sentiment that helps, give us Donald Trump.
That's Brian Rosenwald is his name, and the name of his book is Talk Radio's America. And I'm not trying to endorse it. I've been holding the sound bites here all week. It just didn't seem appropriate to play them in the aftermath of the shooting and so forth. But now the time permitted itself. And I have to say that he's got a speaking of nuance, a more nuanced understanding. And actually, he's a good listener. I've not been secretive about what the purpose of this program is. He just happened to hear it and believe it.
I mean, he's acknowledging, right? He's acknowledging what you said, that it's all about profit. It's all about mouse clicks on websites and ears to radio programs and eyes to TV shows.
And it's only gotten worse, you know.
Do you think so?
Yeah, in the last 15, 20 years, first of all, we have real-time data now of like, oh, that segment didn't do as well as that segment because it wasn't hot enough. It wasn't fiery enough. You know, when he started out, he didn't have that kind of thing. It was all feel. That you get your quarterly, ratings books, and that was it. But now
Arbitron Diaries.
Yeah, Arbitron Diaries.
Oh my God! Yeah, it's true.
That's what they had, and now they literally are sitting there in a control room with meters and all this kinds of stuff. And
can I say one other thing about diaries? This was not always the case, but it was often the case. There was a time when we were on the same station, and I, in certain instances, got to be careful because I want to be accurate, would have higher ratings than he did on my station. But I would look at the diaries, and the diaries were, you would be paid $1, right? You'd be paid $1 to fill out an Arbitron diary.
You get it in the mail.
You get it in the mail with $1, okay? So people would have to fill out when they listened. And even in those books, as we would call them, where I outrated Limbaugh on my station because I was not yet syndicated, there was a subjective part of the diary where you could fill in anything you wanted to fill in. And even if I outrated him, I never got the fill-in comments. The people would write about Rush, you know what I mean? Like the passion was with him, even if I had more ears. And I think that was a factor of his success and a factor as to why this model continues.
It's true. And my favorite Rush story is his station in Palm Beach. He moves from New York to Florida for tax reasons, I think, as well as weather.
Confiscatory taxes, I'm sure.
Confiscatory taxes.
Right.
And he is on a station with Randy Rhoads, the liberal who would eventually be on Air America, and is very loud and screamy and is as passionate as anyone. And Rush complained to the station, why do I have to hear her every day when I'm driving home? And they said, well, Rush, she outrates you. And he never raised it again because he understood this is a business.
It's a business. It's a business. This was awesome. What a great tutorial, man. Thank you so much. And the thing about it is, this book stands up. Maybe that's a bad thing for the country, but it stands up.
It really.
It's prescient and it stands up.
I didn't expect it to stand up quite as well as it did. I always say to people, I never expected that 2 years after the book came out, I have editors coming to me saying, can you write a piece to explain why these talk radio hosts are dying because they won't take this vaccine for this virus that shut down the world? It would have sounded science fiction-y to 2019 me, but I had to write those pieces about hosts.
Well, can I say that when the 2016 campaign ended and so many books were written about the cycle, I would say if you want to read a book that explains what happened in 2016, it's Brian Rosenwald's book. So,
well, I always appreciate you helping me to sell books.
I hope we sell some books for you, but my intent really was early on in the Mingle project, I wanted to drill down on the media, and you know how I feel about your work. There's no one who has captured it. I agree with Rush Limbaugh. Like, you get it. You get it. And he knew you got it, and he acknowledged it. And I'm so happy to have the audio, because if we didn't have the audio, people might think, oh, what a hit job. Rush loved it.
Right.
He loved it.
And the funny thing was, I tried to get Rush and Sean Hannity and people like that. In fact, I got people in the business gave me their emails, and Rush's chief of staff eventually sent me a brush off email. And of course I was like, can I get in your archives? And they were like, no. Hannity, I finally got an email. I think it was 2016 on election day. I'm working the polls. And I finally get back a one-line email from his AOL email, which is now deactivated because it got out there, saying, why should I help you? And the answer was because I wanted to get it, because I wasn't interested in spending 9 years of my life writing a hit piece. It was, I want to understand what's motivating you, what's driving this industry, how this developed. And I did talk to a bunch of conservative hosts and a bunch of Republican politicians, and they helped me to understand what's going on here and what the appeal was.
There it is. I mean, that is how the media became polarized and took politicians along for the ride. Brian Rosenwald, Talk Radio's America. Can I just say one, thank you, Brian. Really appreciate you. That was really terrific. Really, really great. Gang, I want to make sure that I mention, A, subscribe to my YouTube channel, more Mingle episodes to come. And B, and I can take no credit for this, these Mingle meetups, these organic Mingle meetups. Thank you, Bonnie Glushan, and all of our captains. Today, September 30, Glenn in Cincinnati, Lindsay in Portland, Oregon, Sarah in Oklahoma City, Sarah Sweet, love Sarah Sweet, on Sunday, October the 5th, Kim in Colorado on October the 7th, Ryan in Austin on the 14th, Ken in Reading on Saturday the 18th, Beth in Chicago Sunday the 19th, Amy in Houston on Saturday the 25th, Bonnie herself in LA on the 26th, Tony in Albany on the 29th. What are these dates? Michael, what are you talking about? These are gatherings, organic gatherings of radio listeners and people attracted to the Mingle Project, some of whom aren't even radio listeners, and they're coming together in public spaces. Some they talk politics, and some of the gatherings they don't talk politics. They're all laid out on my website under the Mingle Project. Check out the drop-down menu. One final thing I want to say. Anytime I'm talking about books, political scientists, social scientists relative to the Mingle Project, or things that I have read that fall under this umbrella, they are all posted on the website. Thank you, Maya, for the legwork, and David Yang that go into that. So you can always fact check me, read more, learn more, and the interviews that I've conducted, you can take for a walk because they've been released in podcast form, and everything fits this common thread and narrative, and that's why I want you to hear them, okay? Thank you so much. Thank you, Creative Outfit. Thank you, Parks Casino. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, and we'll see you for episode 4 real soon.